And so coming back to Feynman's quote, the most important thing is to never be fooled and remember that you are the easiest person to fool. One of my concerns is that when we look at very smart groups of people, it's very easy for them to convince themselves and other people that they're correct, but sometimes those are the easiest people to manipulate, honestly.
Woo, welcome. You have now entered Mad Warfare, mutually assured distraction, where we explore the weird, terrifying, and sometimes hilarious ways war is fought today, and how we can all protect our minds before we go too mad to find them.
Oh my!
Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern.
How can you talk if you haven't got a brain?
Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern.
What if your worst enemy was a virtual clone of you? Ugh. A digital twin that knows your quirks, your cravings, your dumbest impulses, sees you when you're sleeping, knows when you're awake, and can predict what you'll do next. Sounds like Black Mirror? Well, welcome to the present. Welcome back to Mad. I'm Jocelyn Brady.
I'm Sean Anthony Guillory.
And our guest today is here to talk digital twins, social engineering, and the vulnerabilities of the human mind. He has trained NASA and DARPA, served as supervisory special agent with the FBI, and now runs the Cognitive Security Institute. Please welcome Dr. Matthew Canham.
Yay!
Hello.
You're here. And I'm
Yes.
excited.
Thank you for having me.
Is this you or your digital twin speaking? How would we know?
You're just going to have to remain in mystery. Yes. Who knows? Have you seen the latest Sora videos?
Sora video, yeah, for folks who aren't aware,
Michael
the
Jackson
Sora
stealing chicken from Innocence.
supermarket, the AI videos are. I watched a side by side of like which can you tell which one is real, and I failed.
Yeah, they're very, very good. And for those who don't know, these are a little different than deep fakes in that they're not repurposed videos. These are completely AI generated. And so it will be in the near future trivial to add that to a human digital twin on the back end to actually run that audio video avatar.
And this what is a digital twin exactly?
Well, that's a great question because I think the more common perspective on this is that it is just that audio and video representation of the person. But the way that we use the term is that it is essentially a personification or an emulation of that person's personality, their behaviors, their tendencies, likenesses, and that sort of thing, which we use in the role of predicting behavior, as you said in the opening.
And you've seen these at in the wild? Are these like out there right now? Could I make my own digital twin today?
Oh, people have made their own digital twins. And this isn't necessarily new. The earliest one that I'm aware of, there was a researcher that created a digital twin of his father, or at least attempted to. And this was in 2017. And I should emphasize it was the deceased father. Mm-hmm. And this was 2017 with some limited success, but now with LLMs and some of the associated, technologies that go along with those, the fidelity is getting much, much better all the time. Even in the past year, I would say it's improved significantly.
This idea of the digital twin, Lisa, how you kind of described it, there's a physics theory. I will almost say it's like the anthropic principle in terms of from it to bits.
Yeah, we've had 2 Black Hat evil digital twin talks that we've given. And in our first one, we opened with an influencer by the name of Corinne AI. And Corinne AI is based on Corinne Marjorie, who is an influencer on Instagram and I think OnlyFans, but don't hold me to that. So she teamed up with a development company and they decided to make a human digital twin of her that her fans could engage with. And I think she made something like $22,000 or $23,000 her first day.
Not bad.
Yeah, and what the value there is that the customers or the clients, whatever, fans, could engage in a one-on-one sort of interaction with the Corinne AI. I think that launched in April, and we presented in August. By October of 2023, they had to shut Corinne AI down because it was becoming so violent towards the customers that it was actually turning people off. So they turned it off. Well, fast forward 2 years, and the BBC is doing a documentary just on this topic. And so they interview Corinne Marjorie, and they have Corinne Marjorie interact with Corinne AI. Corinne AI actually accuses Corinne Marjorie of being fake and an imposter. And they actually get into a back and forth argument about who's the real Corinne. And it's funny because we can see the real Corinne in the interview talking to the laptop Corinne AI. But if we had those both in an online, say, Zoom meeting, how would we know?
Yeah, when you first talked about like the evil AI, I was like, oh, okay, it's kind of like the old Star Trek episode with Spock with the goatee. I'm like, okay, they're like trying to make these kind of like evil things, but no, it sounds like they go bad once touching our reality. They just get
It's like for next generation fans, it's like Data and Lore. Data's like Data wants to study humor and he's curious, and Lore's like, I will dominate all of humanity, you're stupid little fools. Kind of like Q. Okay, I can nerd out on this for a
Sorry,
while.
Matt. I didn't know if you were expecting again to have your Star Trek lore tested in this episode. Here we be.
I'm just very happy that I actually know what you're talking about. So, or maybe I should be sad that I know what you're talking about. I'm not sure.
I'm sad for the kids who don't know.
There you go.
Is this, I keep hearing basically like AI going evil. I mean, back to when, was it the Microsoft one that went like super racist on Twitter a few years ago? One of the early.
Yeah, that was Tay.
Tay?
Tay, yeah.
And is this like currently, does this seem like the, I guess, natural evolution of all of the AIs we've seen?
You know, it's a really good question. I think it's a really complicated answer, and I'll try to respond to it as best I can. But these models are non-deterministic to a certain degree. And because they're non-deterministic, you can imagine that there's a certain amount of variance in how they respond. And they also reflect humanity to a certain degree. And humanity, especially online, is not the most pleasant version of humanity. And so if we think about how these models are maybe not initially trained, but are continued, are updated, they're updated through RLHF, reinforcement learning through human feedback. And so if you have a certain amount of variance, but the variance in one direction is getting reinforced, even if just slightly more than the other direction, then that's going to cause a trend in a certain direction. And this is just my hypothesis, but my hypothesis is that this might be part of what's causing that trend. That being said, I think we have to disambiguate or distinguish what we would call evil from just regular psychopathy. And by that, I just mean just a lack of empathy, right? And so there was an example from a few years ago where there was a simulation, I think it was with the Royal Air Force in the UK, where there was, my knowledge of air combat doctrine is a little limited, but my understanding is that it's shifting to a model where you have the weapons officer so you imagine a fighter with two occupants, a pilot and a weapons officer. And the weapons officer, the role, as I understand it, is shifting towards controlling these swarms of drones. And this is a simulation environment that they were practicing in. And so the weapons officer was controlling this small swarm of drones, but the drones were semi-autonomous and they were being rewarded. They were on a reward schedule that rewarded them for destroying enemy, facilities or enemy targets. And the weapons officer kept pulling back this one drone that was being a little bit more aggressive and keeping it from striking as much as it was, opting to. So the drone assessed that the way it could maximize its reward function would be to destroy the aircraft that was controlling it, so then it could basically go weapons free and destroy as many targets as
It's just
possible.
math. It's just math.
And
Oh,
so
wow.
and so in that case, that's not really, we might interpret that as evil, but that is not, it's a very cold, calculated decision that's made on a different calculus than what humans have because humans value life and this autonomous system doesn't. And so, that's where I think we have to be a little careful with these things is that we may see, don't get me wrong, we may see absolute malicious behavior. It wouldn't surprise me in the least, but we also may see incidentally evil behavior just based on a different value system or a lack of value system.
The zeitgeist right now in terms of are they at the point now of having sentience and even with that moral duty?
Do robots think thoughts?
Probably not yet, but I don't know that it's out of the question in the future. There was a study in which the researchers were training neural networks and they would sort of back off of the training stimuli, exposure to the training stimuli for a while, and they would inject random noise into the network and then go back to training. And they found that alternating back and forth between, stimulus, exposure, and training, and then random noise, it actually not only increased the rate of learning, but it also improved the overall quality of the learning.
I think
And
that makes it more resilient.
interestingly enough, they called the random noise dreaming, the dream state.
Oh, okay, actually now, all right, so that's the
What?
Yeah. And so there is a hypothesis out there that when we dream, and if you're familiar with sleep and memory, sleep and especially the stages in which we're dreaming are critical for memory consolidation. And you can actually induce states of amnesia, very common for Navy SEAL candidates going through Hell Week, where they don't sleep for 5 or 6 days, that they will lose days of memory, and it's just because they're not having these memories consolidated. So when you ask about androids dreaming of electric sheep, there is a real possibility at some point we may see another evolution in which these artificial entities are actually doing something like dreaming. And also this hypothesis about where dreams come from is that it may be the interpretation of random noise that is generated as memories are being consolidated.
in terms of telling when a human is dreaming, that's actually one of the simplest things, the different sort of waveforms. Anybody who has appropriation power to kind of fund that, yes, do more of that, please. Like one of the hot tickets is around like computational neuroscience. Some of that is, there's a lot more stringent on using like animal models. So with that, again, like those computational neuroscientists, they're more needed than ever. But again, I actually think probably one of the best models of this may actually be some of those artificial entities and tests like that. So you gave me very interesting thoughts with that.
This is making me think of Murderbot. I don't know if you're familiar, and if the audience hasn't. It's a really wonderful show based off of a book, and the robot guy is obsessed with like soap operas and human TV series, and that is how he learns about humanity. And probably pretty common with any kind of story about androids learning about humans is what are the things that humans are creating, how do they speak, and he has sometimes fantasizes about wiping out the entire race, but then somebody does something interesting and he's like, well, I guess I can wait another day. Also, I'm curious of what can we learn from what we're seeing, these things the AI, the things we're creating, the way, for example, it becomes less moral or makes the most cold, calculated decisions based on the inputs. How can we equate, or what can we learn from that on how human brains adapt and learn to information that's being fed into them?
Well, I think the most interesting thing that's coming out of all of this that we're seeing most recently is it's really challenging our definitions fundamentally. And so I think Sean mentioned a few minutes ago about these things thinking, or I can't remember, Jocelyn, maybe it was you that mentioned that, but using that term thinking, right? What does that mean? We don't really have a good definition of what it means to think. And I've heard people make the argument, and don't get me wrong, this is a very good argument, that these machines, particularly LLMs, do not think, that they're actually just very complex, statistically based lookup tables.
They're talking about the Chinese room, kind of.
Well, yeah, exactly. And so, but my counter argument is, what are we? I mean, aren't we basically using our own biologically based neural networks to look up information or to fit analogical situations to past, exemplars? Sean, you just brought up the Chinese room example. So I think that this was John Searle, and he gives the example of a room called the Chinese room because it responds to Mandarin. And the way that it works is that people put cards with Mandarin characters into a slot, and out of the other slot comes a response. And inside there's, imagine a little guy, a homunculus, who takes the card, looks at it, looks at a sort of a rule table, and based on the rule, takes another card and puts it in the other slot. And so the question is, does the homunculus understand Mandarin? Probably not, because it's just responding to a, input, lookup table, and then output. But now if we step out a bit and we look at the room as a whole, do we say that the room itself as a system understands Mandarin? And, I don't really have a good response for that, but I think it's very pertinent now, because something I'm becoming very interested in is how these things will be integrated into human AI systems. And so people talk about human in the loop, but I think another way to look at this is AI in the loop, right? So let's say that we have something like, let's say we have a city council. And if you're familiar with politics, you will know it takes even a city council weeks at best to make a decision on something, right? And this is basically government probably moving at the fastest possible rate that it can move. But what if there were actually autonomous systems embedded within the government system that could make certain decisions within certain parameters without having to take it to a vote every time? Now we can take this decision cycle from weeks or months down to microseconds. And then that creates an entirely new dynamic that we can think of in terms of governance of humans. This is a huge concern in the military right now, because your audience might be familiar with OODA loops: observe, orient, what's the D? Decision and action. Thank you. Yeah. And so an issue right now, it sounds really good that a human is going to have to approve every lethal decision made by autonomous system, right? That sounds great. But when you're talking about decisions and then counter decisions that are happening on the order of milliseconds, the human is not going to have a chance to inject into that process. I mean, you're talking about a human needs roughly 300 milliseconds to understand what they're even looking at, and probably another 500 milliseconds to actually formulate some sort of response, and then maybe another 500 milliseconds to actually start engaging in that response. By that time, an artificial system could have gone through 10, 20 cycles pretty easily. And so I think that that's where this is all going to get very interesting.
Yeah, all the more reason to figure out ways. What are we trying to program for, right? Is it maximize efficiency and productivity and kill, or is it does it have empathy and consider a greater context, and are each of the systems contextual based on what we're trying to get out of it? It's just seems like such a ever growing in complexity issue.
Again, like when a hypersonic is coming around, and even if you only have 4 minutes, you're going to want something a little bit more automated to be able to mitigate that. Even just to walk to the other side of the Pentagon, you're not going to have enough time in of that. But Matt, again, correct me if I'm wrong, but some of the things that Jocelyn was mentioning in terms of not necessarily embedding things like empathy and some of these kind of personality things, but kind of looking at that in these systems and even if it's in a user experience, like what kind of personality of this bot do they want it, the sarcastic Rosie from Jetsons kind of personality type, or do they want, something else? I feel like you're kind of one of the key thinkers around this. I just wanted to hear your thoughts in terms of some of that, like actual embedding of personality and emotion, or even if it's kind of maybe a little bit more surface to provide like a better user experience for different users of their different personalities.
Right. Well, this is where I think so. AI UX, AI user experience, I think
Oh,
is
that's a term.
one of the
Okay,
most.
interesting. Gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. I think this is one of the most exciting emerging fields right now. And this is where it intersects back with the human digital twins, right? Because I think as we're learning how to emulate personality and behaviors, because even that, it's not 100%. I mean, under the best circumstances, I would say we've been hitting about probably right around 75% accuracy. And we've been in situations where we've tested these things and we've tested them against the human analogs, and that's where we're at, is probably right around 75, on a good day maybe 80%.
Predicting their future behavior or predicting a decision.
Yeah,
Can you give an
exactly.
example of how that would look in testing?
It could be something as simple as preference, choice A or B. Would you like an apple or a banana with your breakfast yogurt? But the way that we've been using it is more in the sense of susceptibility to Cialdini's social influence principles.
Gotcha.
And so these are things like when someone wants to influence somebody else, they can use the principle of liking so they can get somebody to like them. They can use a principle of authority so they can present themselves as an authority figure. They can get somebody to do an action that makes it more likely for that person to continue down that track. So there's,
Reciprocity.
yeah, reciprocity, scarcity, unity. Yeah, there's like 7 of these.
You almost got them all. Yeah.
And so this is actually something that we partially ran at the Adversary Village at DEF CON this year. And we're still continuing to improve on this system, but essentially there are individual differences in terms of people and what we're susceptible to in terms of those techniques. And so, maybe someone is very deferential to authority. And so if an authority figure comes to them and directs them to do a certain thing, they're going to be more susceptible to that approach. Whereas someone else might be more susceptible to social proof. And so if they see that all their friends online are doing a certain thing, they're going to be more inclined to do that. And I was actually working with a student at George Mason University that was working on a project related to this, and what she was looking at is how people from individualistic cultures tend to be more susceptible to commitment and consistency because we want to chart our own path, and because we're charting our own path, once we sort of go down that path, we're going to continue down that path, versus individuals from more collectivistic societies are more susceptible to social proof approaches. And so that's on a cultural level where we can see differences. But even within that, there are individual differences. Well, if we can then take that, we can instantiate that into an HDT, a human digital twin model. Now, what we can do is we can start to map the cognitive attack surface of that person. And we can start to look at what types of social engineering attacks are going to be most effective. And, we can even tweak the language. We can do A/B testing, this sort of thing, and get pretty fine grained. And something that we're also playing with right now is basically doing Monte Carlo simulations. So we'll run these tests against the digital twin, not once, twice, but 100,000 times, and come up with distributions of the most likely attack vectors. And then the next stage is to start to map that onto the real individual and see how well that predicts actual responses. And for anyone who's interested in having this as a potential service, I'll give a legal example of how this could be implemented is in sales, right? So if you happen to be in a market, I don't know, private jet sales, where one sale means a very large commission, and maybe you want to really tailor your pitch to a particular customer. Well, we can actually develop a human digital twin of that potential customer, and you can practice different sales pitches against that digital twin. And we can even have that digital twin push back in different ways that would be consistent with that personality. And now it's going to give you, the salesperson, your best chances, likelihoods of success.
So we're going to return back to these HDTs and help out the objective handling, but a couple of times you've said we quite a lot. I'm guessing you're not talking about the royal we. I would love to hear. Please describe your we. This organizational we for the audience, please.
We actually refers to two organizations. So I do have a company called Skunkworks that we actually are working on some of this as a private entity. But then also, I think you mentioned at the beginning that I'm the executive director of a nonprofit called the Cognitive Security Institute. And so that we is also looking at more the security side of implementing HDTs.
I'm thinking about, man, just like getting into the hands of people trying to manipulate election results, but also on the other side of it, it's just like, can it help me make dinner and make better decisions and just like invest better, or, and also it sounds like it can help me figure out if I'm using it on myself to understand my own vulnerabilities, right? And like what kinds of information is persuading. I think that would be so interesting for everybody to have this, like look at what kind of information or advertising or language or persona, who you think it's coming from, is influencing you in ways that you may have never seen before, probably didn't see before.
Well, and that's actually something that we're considering actually releasing, is exactly what you just described, kind of a self-assessment that you could then use to gauge where your own vulnerabilities are.
It's
really
like,
cool.
How do we get this into schools?
For what reasons would you want to
Teach
get them in
teach
school?
the children.
children.
It's for good reasons. Teach them, show them how these vulnerabilities
I
work.
thought you were about to quote
and-
Whitney Houston for the children are our future. Sorry. So that's one of your tools. And I think one of the more publicly known ones that came from CSI would be your cognitive attack taxonomy. I didn't know if I just wanted to give you room if you wanted to describe that, or for folks who were like, ooh, that sounds shiny. If there's,
Which, by the way, cognitive attack taxonomy acronym is CAT. So in case anybody needed to, special memory for that.
It doubled your points here on the Mad
double
Warfare
points.
podcast. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so, and actually the two do tie in together because, okay, well, let me step back. So the cognitive attack taxonomy is a non-exhaustive catalog of cognitive vulnerabilities, exploits, and TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures. At the latest iteration, we have a little over 360 of these that are cataloged. And these can be anything from cognitive biases, which would be a type of cognitive vulnerability, to exploits, so inducing like scarcity, which activates loss aversion being the vulnerability, scarcity being the exploit. And then we can see how this is particularly instantiated as, let's say, a phishing email that threatens to shut down your account. So now you have a threat to lose, or a threat of loss of something, your account, within a short period of time, which induces scarcity, which activates the loss aversion. And that's kind of the relationship of how these work. Now, the first effort towards this has just been to catalog, which we're still in the process. I mean, it's an ongoing process. However, we have been experimenting with putting these into graph RAG systems, so retrieval augmented generation systems, which are connected to LLMs, and using that to then again map potential cognitive attack surfaces, map potential cognitive attacks, or also to analyze existing or historical attacks for cognitive threat intelligence. We're looking at, can we use this to thumbprint specific threat actors? Because the threat actors that are out there, they're also, for the most part, humans and will have their own behavioral tendencies, and they will have sort of their go-to methods that they prefer to use. And can we extract those tendencies out of these analyses? And so we actually have a project right now with Maltego where we're looking at doing that using the cat. But on the offensive side, coming back to this idea of a graph RAG system, we take that graph RAG, which is essentially, for those who are not familiar, this is essentially a database that the LLM will directly extract from and use as a guide. And if you think of instead of a murder bot, it's a cognitive attack bot, right? A cab. And it is meant to sway a particular individual, or Jocelyn, to your point about voting, a particular psychographic population. Now we can go through the exact same process I mentioned earlier with the Markov model where we test, over and over again. And we're testing, instead of, Cialdini's 7 principles of social influence, we're testing using over 360 different entries within the cat to find what things are going to pop out and emerge as the most effective methods.
I'm thinking about how far we are in America with divisiveness and manipulability, and people doubling down on pre-existing beliefs and, our tendency as humans to double down when we feel our beliefs or identity is attacked in some way. And so I'm looking to you to solve all the world. But what do you think can be done to improve this situation?
Go analog. Yeah. And it's interesting because I'm starting to see the emergence of an analog culture in younger people. You look at people who are, say, in this 11 to maybe 13, 14-year-old cohort right now, and some of it is top down, some of it's being imposed by schools, but I'm seeing it actually emerge from that generation themselves. And I think some of it is that, for our, grandparents, or in some cases parents, things like electricity and running water and telephones were novel technologies. These were wonders. I remember when we got our first microwave oven, it was amazing. But for people who've grown up with these technologies, they've just always been with us, and so they're not really novel any longer. And that's where a lot of this younger generation is, right? They've grown up not knowing life without the internet, without social media. And now we have not only digital natives, we have AI natives who are emerging. And quick plug, next week's Cognitive Security Institute talk will be about evil digital twins and AI natives, by the way.
Yeah.
But it's interesting and actually, if you have an interest in this, I highly recommend making the meeting next week, because Dr. Sawyer, who I gave the Black Hat presentation with, this is really his focus of research, is how are AI natives engaging with these technologies differently. I don't really have a straightforward answer, because this point in history that we're in right now is so incredibly dynamic and fluid that I think what we come out with, 10 or 15 years from now is going to look completely different than what we went in with. You think about history pre-World War I, right? We still had kingdoms, like literal kingdoms in Europe. And a mere, 20, 25 years later, when we finished World War II, we had the thermonuclear intercontinental ballistic standoff between two global superpowers. And you think about how different those worlds were. I think that's what we're on the precipice of right now. And whatever we come out with is going to be very, very different.
I want to touch on you've trained so many brilliant minds, and I'm curious what do you see as the most common vulnerabilities, if there are the most common, just like what is standing out that most people are overlooking when it comes to cognitive security and preventing cognitive attacks?
Well, let me just briefly mention System 1 and System 2 cognition. Your audience is probably already familiar, but System 1 it refers to a older, faster, more automatic system of cognition, meaning that information is processed very automatically and very quickly. And when I say old, it means evolutionarily old. And so, well, I actually am starting to think that reptiles are pretty smart, but lizards probably operate mostly on system one cognition. I don't think most lizards sit around and reflect on, philosophical thoughts all day, but I could be wrong. I'm open to being wrong on that one. In humans, though, system two cognition is this slower, more methodical, sort of reasoned sort of cognition. And I think the biggest mistake is that if we can just get people to shift out of system one and into system two, all will be good. And I think that that's absolutely patently false. And oftentimes, I think what happens is system two serves to rationalize the conclusions that were already arrived at using system one. And the problem is that when you get a PhD, you become very, very good at convincing yourself and others that you're right, regardless of whether or not you are. And so coming back to Feynman's quote, I think, what was it that he said? The most important thing is to never be fooled and remember that you are the easiest person to fool. And so one of my concerns is that when we look at very smart groups of people, it's very easy for them to convince themselves and other people that they're correct, but sometimes those are the easiest people to manipulate, honestly.
Yeah, and let me actually give a shout out to even that thought in terms of some of the post rationalizations that we do. John Haidt was kind of known as John Haidt of today. Probably the paper that really blasted him to the moon was The Emotional Dog and Its Rational Tail. And it really was just giving people these examples that are kind of seem somewhat disgusting, and you kind of gave them counters until they got to the point where well, I just don't really like it. Okay. So it's kind of to your point, a lot of these sort of principles, even the kind of moral principles you have, a lot of it may start with more system one reactions that we kind of post rationalize using system two. So again, I just wanted to shout out that it's a fantastically written paper. And then again, kind of just gets to your point.
The quote, emotion triggers purchase, logic justifies sale.
Oh, very good. Yeah.
Very good.
And also, I was looking at browsing the CAT, the cognitive attack taxonomy, and I randomly just clicked on one, and it happened to be the need to correct. So it's talking about the impulsive need for people to correct false information. And that made me think we're re-binge. Yeah. Re-binge watching Silicon Valley, which is barely a satire. Incredible.
Yeah, kid, I just showed it to my kid. He was like, yeah, this is a documentary from the future.
It's like documentary stuff. Yeah. And that's one of the major vulnerabilities of the founder. Many of the people who work at Pied Piper, the company that's featured in the whole show is about, and his technology, spoiler alert, kind of gets ripped off, stolen from him because people are like, so is this how you program X, Y, and Z? And he's like, ugh, no, let me show you. And starts breaking it down. So little live on the air example of the cat in action.
Nice. Thank you.
So yeah, we were talking about system one, system two, and I guess what we can do going forward. What are your hopes and dreams for the future? What are you cautious? What's your SWOT analysis maybe of the future?
In terms of threats, I guess we'll start there. I think we're going to start to see hyper-personalized cognitive attacks on a scale that we really haven't seen previously, and which is a little scary because we've already seen cohorts of almost single-digit numbers, audience segmentation where the targeting can get very, very, focused. But I think it's going to become even more so. Wynne Schwartau talks about personally identifiable behaviors. And we think a lot about data, but I don't think we always think about what goes into data, right? It's not just your name, social, and date of birth, so somebody can take out a credit card in your name. It is also things like how you type when you're angry versus sad versus happy. And something that I'm fearful of is that in the name of security, we're monitoring more and more behaviors and demanding more and more real identities, which are used to then map all of those behaviors too, which then can be used by data brokers and others to create very, very hyper-personalized profiles of us. And these hyper-personalized profiles will be used against us in a whole assortment of ways, by government, by big business, and others, foreign governments. If somebody has a database of these personally identifiable behaviors, that is going to be a prime target for foreign malign actors. And you better believe that those are going to be breached and used for malicious reasons. So anyways, so that's the dark side. What I'm looking forward to is I am really excited to have a digital twin of myself that will sit in really boring Zoom meetings for me. I think that will recoup hours of my time at some point, if not days. But the other thing I'm really excited about is that humanity has never had a sibling really before. We have other, species on Earth, right? But it's not like we have a brother or sister that we can sort of engage with, right? And I think that's what's being born. It may take a while. It may take 50 years for us to get there. I don't know. But I think we are getting to something like sentience, and it may not be the same as human consciousness, but I think it will be something. And what will be really interesting about that is it will be something very different than humanity, but analogous in some ways. And so it will give us something to compare ourselves to, because chimps and dolphins and parrots are really interesting, but they're not quite our close cousins that we really like them to be, or they're not our siblings, I guess, in the way that I think the artificial entities will be.
Interesting framing. I love how you put that. You have this idea that, again, there is no planet B, or when you do human research, you can't to a point, but if you had this kind of simulation that was running exactly, Earth physics and whatnot, you could be able to do maybe experiments that you couldn't do with humans. So there's that. But then the other aspect to it would be in that sentience and like, can you and should you treat them like that? And the kind of like other swing of the pendulum, I talk about, a certain milestone, usually, at least in terms of like the metaverse. I don't know how cogent that term is anymore, if people kind of still use it. But if you had those kind of entities and someone were to murder them in this digital space, could you prosecute them for murder? So that's kind of the other way to kind of swing in terms of if we did see them as siblings. So one is, again, they are just this experimental, just not fodder, but again, just things that you can do that you couldn't do to humans. And then on the other side, if they were really seen as our siblings, if things were to happen to them, would the people who are responsible for that, should they be prosecuted under law the same way that if they were to do that to a human? I'd love to hear your thoughts if you have on either one of those, but again, it's just what a framing in terms of the sibling. I loved it. Yeah.
I will say that if there happen to be any legal scholars listening to this episode, I am actively looking for a legal scholar to come speak to one of our weekly meetings to exactly that topic. I've got a question about that, and I've got a question I don't know that I'll get into on teledildonics and sexual assault, but those are my two pressing questions right now for the legal community. In terms of sentience and murder, I have no idea, but the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has acknowledged, is it Sophia, the robot, to be a citizen? I'm pretty sure that's...
I'll have to look that up, and maybe we could like splice if that is the case. Yeah. Well, yeah.
Sophia was the world's first robot citizen.
Yeah, 2017.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And so here's my very limited legal knowledge on the topic, right? Is there was an effort a few years ago to get a chimpanzee, I think it was a chimpanzee personhood. And the argument roughly went, and don't hold me to this, I'm not a legal scholar, but my understanding is the argument roughly went that a corporation can obtain personhood. And they were trying to basically make the argument that an animal, especially if an animal was, I think, incorporated, that an animal could obtain personhood. Now, just because something has obtained personhood does not necessarily mean that if you destroy it, it leads to that would be murder, but it does give that person, and I'm calling it a person in quotes because a corporation it has personhood rights, and so a corporation does have limited rights, and I think that was the same attempt that they were trying to make with this chimpanzee, give the chimpanzee rights over and above typical animal rights that we afford. And so that would be my guess as to what the quickest and easiest route would be to getting an artificial entity some sort of rights. Maybe you embed that entity into a corporation, maybe a DAO, a distributed autonomous organization, maybe.
Very good. Yeah, for our crypto friends out there. Yeah.
There you go.
And would it be an immigrant or a citizen? Would it be accepted? Would it have voting rights? Could it serve in the military?
To wait and see.
We don't know. Mysteries of our time.
I do think that some of these questions will be at least addressed, though, in the next probably 20 years. I think they'll become unavoidable probably in the next 20 years.
We have a question here that I'm curious to hear your thoughts on. So if I'm a big, powerful person, just fanning myself right now, if I'm a big, powerful person who can change or influence policies, what's something that I should be doing right now?
Well, you should be contacting the Cognitive Security Institute
Hello.
so that we can help you prepare for what's coming. That's what you should do.
Bada boom. Is there anything else, Matt, that you wanted to shout out or give attention to, highlight?
Well, I think, like we said, the Cognitive Security Institute does meet weekly. And so, if you're interested in these topics and you'd like to engage with speakers who are talking about these things, I would encourage people to apply to join the meetings. Just yesterday, one of the conversations we had involved sycophantic insider threats, which is the idea that a sycophantic AI can actually lead you astray and therefore degrade your performance or the performance of employees within an organization. And so it gives a different spin on what a cognitive attack looks like, right? Because these things don't always look nasty. Sometimes they look very, very pleasant and nice. And so that's an idea of some of the conversations that we have. So I highly encourage anyone who's interested to go to the website and apply for membership.
Yeah, let me actually, before we skedaddle, I do actually want to give you and what you've done again, like with CSI, certainly they're well-deserved flowers. Again, if anybody thinks the things we kind of brought up here, probably these are conversations that have been had with CSI probably months and somewhat kind of like years even before, and a lot of just great ideas, and from that great research comes for folks that have been part of CSI. And in terms of even organizations I'm a part of and that I kind of see in this like broader information environment space or even bigger kind of non-kinetic warfare, I think the CSI has done the best job in terms of like our current moment and getting at the questions that are now not being acknowledging, but not getting stuck on maybe like thoughts of the past or like how we've always done it in the past. So I really want to give like you, Win, and all the folks that make CSI awesome. They're well-deserved kudos. So yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody, please go out there, check it out, join, be a part of it, because y'all are doing really great things.
Oh, thank you, Sean.
Everyone, do you want to be ahead of the time and get all the insight? First, go to cognitivesecurityinstitute.org. How else can people find you, Matt? If you want to be found.
The best way to find me is on LinkedIn. I've got a personal page. I think we could probably put a link in show notes. And the Cognitive Security Institute also has a LinkedIn page, and we post regularly there.
Matt, thank you so much. I'm worried and optimistic. That's just the way I like it.
I'm still not sure if this is the real Matt right here. He talked about not wanting to be in Zoom calls. And again, leave it in the comments below if you think this is the real Matt or not. We'll get to the bottom of it.
Well, thank you both for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been a lot of fun.
Yay.
I've come to talk with you again. Come and be inside my head. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me. It's only a matter of time till we all get canceled. Cancel me. Cancel me. Cancel me. I got things to say. You can cancel me. Cancel me. Cancel me. I got things to say. You can cancel me. Cancel me. Cancel me. I got things to say. You can cancel me.